The other day, I read this insane op-ed on Huffington Post from this economist from Stony Brook University about the Green New Deal, which is being pushed by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her comrades, which seeks to replace all fossil fuel energy within the next few decades. Now, even if you're legitimately concerned about climate change, consider the fact that riots have been breaking out in Paris the last couple of weeks over fuel taxes. Fuel taxes that were imposed to reduce CO2 emissions, thereby driving up the cost of living in France. Again, if you're legitimately concerned about climate change, ask yourself, how far are you willing to go with abolishing fossil fuel energy? Are you willing to pay $6 for a gallon of gasoline and much more for goods and services? How about $7 for a gallon of gasoline? $8? Are you willing to double your electricity bills? How about triple your electricity bills? Are you willing to ride a bicycle to work every single day? Are you willing to limit your smartphone to one charge per day? How about limiting showers to once a week? I could ask tons of these questions and I could go on all day, but the point is, these are serious questions you have to ask yourself if you're willing to give up fossil fuel energy, or give up half of fossil fuel consumption, which makes you a climate denier in the eyes of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And as you'll see, it's questions like this that economists like Stephanie Kelton don't want you to ask.
Across America, calls for climate action are growing louder and more fervent. As Naomi Klein wrote this week, quote, "We have been waiting a very long time for there to finally be a critical mass of politicians in power who understand not only the existential urgency of the climate crisis, but also this once-in-a-century opportunity it represents. We're almost there. We understand the problem. We can't allow temperatures to rise by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. The United Nations report gives the world 12 years to make substantial reductions in greenhouse gas emissions to avoid severe climate effects later this century, including in the United States."
Including the United States? Well, that's good to know. I thought that climate change would only impact a few countries and regions here and there. I never thought that global warming would include the United States of America, which is on the globe.
The urgency of the situation can't be overstated.
Can't be overstated? You're telling me this is certainly the first time I'm hearing about climate change.
We have momentum. Incoming Democrats like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York and Rashida Tlaib of Michigan are building support for an ambitious climate plan. And more than 15 members of Congress are calling for a select committee with a mandate to draft comprehensive legislation, a Green New Deal. We have the outline of a plan. We need a mass mobilization of people and resources, something not unlike the U.S. involvement in World War II or the Apollo missions, but even bigger.
You hear that, folks? Dealing with climate change is going to take a World War II level commitment, perhaps even bigger. We're talking hundreds of thousands of Americans risking death, most if not the entire industrial sector dedicated to the cause, massive government spending, price controls on food and other resources, donating tons of scrap metal. Climate change must be a serious threat if we need a bigger commitment than World War II. That war only killed roughly 500,000 Americans and 6 million people in concentration camps and millions more on battlefields and in air raids, and the complete destruction of Europe and much of Asia. That's all nothing compared to the 100 plus people that died from Hurricane Harvey, or the 3,000 plus people that died from Hurricane Maria, which is still a lot of people, don't get me wrong, but combined is still less than 1% of the total American deaths from World War II. Yeah, the destruction from climate change is totally comparable to World War II. Let's get started on that collective effort, you guys. The atomic bombs that were dropped on Japan pale in comparison to the recent California wildfires, which were a result of climate change. Screw genocidal maniacs like the Nazis. They were not nearly as terrifying as the 1 to 3 feet of sea level rise that's coming within the next 200 years.
We must transform our energy system, transportation, housing, agriculture, and more.
Think about this for a second. When government takes control of one business or one corporation, that's called fascism, and rightfully so. This economist is calling for the government control over 4 industries, if not more. Keep that in mind.
Incredible to have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stand in solidarity with hundreds of youth today to collectively voice our generation's demand that Nancy Pelosi and Democratic leadership put forward a plan for a Green New Deal to stop the climate crisis. We got your back, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Stay fighting.
Yeah, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, we have your back, you loving, well-intentioned Marxist.
Capitalism has not always existed in the world, and it will not always exist in the world.
And it will not always exist in the world.
Just a reminder, folks, if you promise to cut your fossil fuel consumption in half within the next 20 years, you're still a climate denier, according to Josephine Stalin over here.
We don't have yet the final vital ingredient. A critical mass of politicians prepared to unleash the enormous power of the public purse to save the planet. We need more political courage and less political consternation. The benefit, not the cost.
That's right, don't think about the cost. Just insert your credit card and sign on the dotted line, you science-hating climate deniers.
Sure, it'll cost a lot of money. That's likely to rattle the nerves of self-proclaimed deficit hawks, Democrats and Republicans alike, who will ask tired questions like, how will we pay for it? What about the deficit and the debt? Won't it hurt the economy? In fact, these questions are already coming, with the eager help of the fossil fuel lobby.
That's right, folks. Budgeting and paying bills is now propaganda from Big Oil. Remember the Count on Sesame Street? Well, he's clearly funded by the Koch brothers.
Senator Mike Lee of Utah said that all proposals I've seen so far would devastate the U.S. economy. Senator Marco Rubio says he's theoretically open to action, but adds, I'm not going to destroy our economy. Democrats risk aiming low if they merely repackage proposals for pay-go infrastructure spending that would build more roads and bridges, but fail to strengthen resilience to worsening climate hazards. These politicians and the pundits who echo them approach the debate all wrong. We can't afford to let deficit politics stand in the way of an ambitious Green New Deal. Here's the good news. Anything that is technically feasible is financially affordable.
Anything that is technically feasible is financially affordable. What a claim. Technically, it's feasible for me to purchase a brand new yacht because technically I could win the lottery next week. Or I could eventually think of an invention one day and become a millionaire after getting a deal on Shark Tank. Or I could buy some cheap land and then happen to discover that there's oil or another resource underneath the ground. I don't currently have money for a new yacht, but technically it's feasible for me to eventually afford one, so I guess I'll just go to the bank and ask if I can borrow some money to buy a yacht.
And it won't be a drag on the economy, unlike the climate crisis itself, which will cause tens of billions of dollars worth of damage to American homes, communities, and infrastructure each year.
First off, the report she cites is full of speculations, but secondly, the costs are cherry-picked and arbitrary. Imagine a report that claimed America is overpaying for food. And in it, it said in 2015 the average American spent $900 on cheeseburgers. Well, I did not eat any cheeseburgers in 2015, so that would not apply to me. I would not be burdened by that cost. Not to mention the flawed premise of collectivizing wealth, which is common from socialists and fascists.
A Green New Deal will actually help the economy by stimulating productivity, job growth, and consumer spending, as government spending has often done. You don't have to go back to the original New Deal for evidence of that.
Economics is driven by production, not by government spending. Government stimulating productivity is just a fancy way of saying fascism, because they're simply taking your money and spending it for you, perhaps on shit you don't want or value. We're gonna raise taxes to build a brand new football stadium down the street. What's that? You don't watch football or the NFL? Well, tough shit. Experts say it will stimulate the economy and create jobs. Besides, if the local team wins the Super Bowl, it will be uplifting for the community. We're gonna subsidize and bail out failing American auto companies. What's that? You don't drive GM or Chrysler cars? What are you, anti-American?
That's un-American.
Well, tough shit. We need to save American brands and a few thousand blue-collar jobs. Stop thinking so much about yourself and think about the community.
In fact, a Green New Deal can create good-paying jobs while redressing economic and environmental inequities. One policy vision by the progressive think tank Data for Progress is based on the foundation of equity and justice. It proposes a transition to a low-carbon economy using clean and renewable energy, the restoration of forests and wetlands, and the buildup of resilience in both rural and urban communities. Rethinking the budget. To save the planet and fix historical inequities, however, we must change the way we approach the federal budget. We must give up our obsession with trying to pay for everything with revenue or spending cuts.
Notice how she has "pay for" in quotes, as if it's a ridiculous question to ask. Remember, kids, when it comes time to apply for a mortgage, if the bank asks you for proof of income, just tell them to stop obsessing about how you're gonna pay for it.
Are taxes an important part of this aggressive climate plan? Sure. Taxes can shape incentives and help change behavior within the private sector. Taxes should be raised to break up concentrations of wealth and income and to punish polluters for the cost and consequences of their actions.
Taxes can change behaviors, and taxes should be used to break up concentrations of wealth and income, and taxes should be used to punish people. Again, does this not sound like fascism?
In a period without federal leadership on the climate crisis, this is how many states and local governments are considering carbon pricing. That's useful, not because we need to pay for it, but to end polluters' harmful behavior.
Anyone notice that she keeps speaking in vague terms? What does she mean by polluters exactly? Is she talking about a shady industrialist that dumps toxic waste into a river? Is she talking about someone that fills up their pickup truck with diesel fuel? Is she talking about someone that does not recycle plastic bottles? Is she talking about dairy farmers whose cattle fart too much? Remember, if having a zero impact on nature is the standard, then simply chopping down a tree for firewood is pollution.
The federal government can spend money on public priorities without raising revenue, and it won't wreck the nation's economy to do so. That may sound radical, but it's not. It's how the US economy has been functioning for nearly half a century. That's the power of the public purse.
Yeah, half a century and over $20 trillion in debt. It worked for 50 years, so I guess we can just keep doing what we're doing and not have to worry about paying off the debt. Could you imagine your parents saying, "Wow, a new credit card offer. I already maxed out my last credit card, so clearly I can just rinse and repeat and not have to worry about my finances." Apparently this magical public purse is so powerful that it can just make money appear out of thin air so that the government doesn't have to raise taxes or pay for anything. I say, whoever invented this public purse deserves a fucking trophy.
Here the cheat have a trophy.
As a monopoly supplier of U.S. currency with full financial sovereignty, the federal government is not like a household or even a business. When Congress authorizes spending, it sets off a sequence of actions. Federal agencies, such as the Department of Defense or the Department of Energy, enter into contracts and begin spending. As the checks go out, the government's bank, the Federal Reserve, clears the payments by crediting the seller's bank account with digital dollars. In other words, Congress can pass any budget it chooses, and our government already pays for everything by creating new money.
Nigga, get the fuck out of here.
See, we don't have to raise revenue, the government can just create new money. Are we sure this HuffPo article wasn't written by the Monopoly Man or Nicolas Maduro?
This is precisely how we paid for the first New Deal. The government didn't go out and collect money by taxing and borrowing because the economy had already collapsed and no one had any money except for the oligarchs.
Good point, except the government under FDR outlawed gold and raised taxes. So yeah, FDR did collect money. Also, not sure if you've read the recent reports, but Social Security is on pace to become insolvent within the next 2 decades. No worries though, the government can just create new money.
The government hired millions of people across various New Deal programs and paid them with a massive infusion of new spending that Congress authorized in the budget. FDR didn't need to find the money, he needed to find the votes. We can do the same for a Green New Deal.
Yeah, and how did that turn out? The American economy never recovered under FDR.
We must give up our obsession with trying to pay for everything with new revenue or spending cuts. Despite lawmakers' stated fears, larger public deficits are not inherently inflationary.
But creating new money sure is inflationary. It's called supply and demand. Maybe read a book on economics, you hack economist. Jumping ahead here.
The US government can never run out of dollars, but humanity can run out of limited global resources.
Hold on a second. I thought this was all about climate change, not limited resources, which Kelton seeks to limit by outlawing fossil fuels. But again with the vague terms, which resources is she talking about exactly? Do we need more fresh water? Okay, allow for some desalination plant construction. Do we need more trees? Develop more tree farms. Jumping ahead here.
The only conversation worth having. Once we understand that money is a legal and social tool, no longer beholden to the false scarcity of the gold standard, we can focus on what matters most. The best use of natural and human resources to meet current social needs and to sustainably increase our productive capacity to improve living standards for future generations.
That's right, folks. We gotta sacrifice our standard of living and way of life for the sake of people who have not been born yet. Sound familiar?
This is ultimately how a Green New Deal can help bridge our political divides. Rural communities in the Midwest have much to gain economically from a Green New Deal as coastal urban areas. We can ensure farm bill subsidies help American farmers earn a good living by simultaneously feeding the nation, generating renewable energy, and capturing carbon soil.
Yes, let's give the farmers more welfare.
How about new?
We can boost manufacturing and construction jobs by retrofitting buildings, electrifying transportation, and hardening our shoreline communities against sea level rise. That such a visionary undertaking can align with and support just transition efforts, led by communities of color, women, and indigenous groups uniquely affected by the climate crisis.
Wow, apparently the climate is racist and sexist. Who knew?
Everything is racist. Everything is racist according to me.
Politicians need to reject the urge to ask, how are we going to pay for it?
And this is where I'm going to conclude because I can only say the same thing so many times. As you can see, this economist, this professional intellectual that teaches at universities and writes opinion pieces for the Huffington Post, is demanding that you suspend your rational judgment and stop asking important questions. And I know it's cliche for people to toss around the term fascist, but that's what Stephanie Kelton is. We haven't even mentioned the fact that other climate alarmists, notably Bill Nye, have called for legal action against climate deniers, which is a clear violation of the First Amendment and free speech. Alex Epstein even mentioned this when he testified in front of Congress. But what Stephanie Kelton is essentially saying here is, shut up, stop asking important questions, don't worry about the costs, and give your freedom and money to the government so that they can save the world.
Yeah, that.
At the end of the day, if the solution to climate change is fascism, then I say grab your surfboard and enjoy those rising sea levels.